All right, today we're going to dive deep into a really powerful and honestly a pretty sobering report about Nigeria. It's a look at the country's journey over the past decade, a journey that started with so much hope and ended up, according to the authors, in a state of profound crisis. So let's break down what they found. So picture this. It's 2015. There's this incredible wave of optimism sweeping the nation. The All Progressives Congress, or APC, comes into power, and they're writing this single, powerful promise right here on the slide: change. And this wasn't just some empty political slogan. It was a real pledge to finally tackle corruption, to bring back security, and to build a future people could believe in. But wow, the journey from that hope to today has been absolutely brutal. This one slide really captures the report's whole argument. On the left, you've got the dream of 2015, and on the right, the reality a decade later, as the report sees it: a collapsed economy, insecurity that's just out of control, and a fundamental failure of the state itself. So the big question is, how did this happen? Well, the report lays out what it describes as a devastating chain reaction. We're going to start with the economy's freefall. Then we'll look at the security crisis that it helped create. From there, we'll dig into the governance failures that the report says are the real root of the problem. And finally, we'll cover its urgent plea for the world to pay attention. Okay, first up, the economy. And the report makes this crystal clear. This is not about abstract numbers on a page. This is about the total collapse of livelihoods for over 200 million people. It's a story you can see through the currency, the debt, and the staggering poverty rates. Just look at this chart. It tells you so much of the story in one glance. Back in 2015, a single US dollar would get you about 197 naira. The projection for 2025? Over 1,500. That isn't just devaluation. That's the complete evaporation of people's savings, of their purchasing power. For the average Nigerian, it means the cost of everything, from food to fuel, has become almost unbearable. So, with the currency in a nosedive, you have to ask, how did the government keep the lights on? Well, the report points to one thing: a massive borrowing spree. Since 2015, Nigeria's public debt has shot up by over 1,000%. I mean, that number is just staggering. It shows a financial path that is completely, totally unsustainable. And this slide, this donut chart, really shows you the devastating real-world cost of all that debt. That huge red slice, that's not building schools or hospitals. That's just the money spent to pay the interest on existing loans. The report points out that this one thing, debt servicing, now costs more than health, education, and infrastructure combined. The country is literally borrowing money just to pay back old loans, and it's choking off any real investment in its own people. And what's the human cost of this economic disaster? The report, pulling data from the World Bank, projects that by 2025, 139 million Nigerians will be living in poverty. Let that number sink in. It's a social catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. Now, this kind of economic desperation is almost always tied to what the report details next: a catastrophic breakdown of security that has left the entire nation feeling like it's under siege from the inside out. And that's the thing. Nigeria isn't just facing one conflict. It's fighting on at least 3 fronts at the same time. You've got the long-running Boko Haram and ISWAP insurgency in the northeast. Then, in the northwest and central regions, you have organized bandits who've created this terrifying kidnapping for ransom industry. And on top of that, a violent separatist movement is raging in the southeast. The report makes it clear the nation's security forces are just completely stretched to the breaking point. And the human toll on those forces is just devastating. The report states that just between 2019 and 2025, 454 soldiers were killed in ambushes. That's not just a statistic. It's a number that speaks to the sheer lethality of these conflicts and the incredible sacrifice being made on the front lines. The report then moves into what is, without a doubt, its most sensitive and controversial finding. It tackles a question that's being debated fiercely, both inside Nigeria and around the world. Is some of this violence actually a targeted campaign against Christian communities? So the report lays out the two sides of this incredibly intense debate. On one hand, it cites human rights groups that allege somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 Christians have been killed since 2009. On the other side, you have the official position of the Nigerian government, which is that this is about conflicts over resources, like land and water, not religion. But then, critics cited in the report push back, saying that when you see churches being specifically targeted, that points to a clear religious motive. Our goal here is just to present this very complex debate exactly as the analysis lays it out. Now, the end result of all this violence from every single front is a humanitarian disaster. Over 3.7 million people in Nigeria are now internally displaced. They've been forced to flee their homes. That's one of the largest displaced populations anywhere on Earth, with so many of them living in camps in just horrific conditions. So you have to ask yourself, how did it get this bad? Well, the report's central argument is that the economic collapse and the security crisis, they're not just random accidents, they're symptoms of a much, much deeper problem, a systemic failure of governance, which the report calls the rot within. The report documents what it calls a steady erosion of the rule of law, and this timeline here shows a few key moments. It points to the highly controversial removal of a chief justice right before an election in 2019. Then, of course, the 2020 Lucky Tollgate massacre, where peaceful protesters were fired upon by the military. This pattern, the report argues, has led to a growing crackdown on media and free speech today. And when the rule of law weakens, you get what the report describes as a culture of impunity, a feeling that powerful people can get away with anything. It gives some pretty shocking examples. A high-level official accused of massive corruption who was secretly brought back into his job. Anti-corruption agencies like the EFCC being accused of being used as political weapons, and maybe most chilling of all, the fact that to this day, no one has been held responsible for the killing of peaceful civilians at Lekki. This breakdown of law and opportunity has a very real, very personal consequence for millions. It's a phenomenon so common, it's been given its own name, Japa. It's a Yoruba word that means to flee. And it's come to describe this desperate exodus of Nigerians looking not just for a better life, but for basic survival and dignity. And who is it that's leaving? It's the very people a country desperately needs to build a future. Doctors, nurses, university professors, tech professionals, they're leaving in droves. The report calls this brain drain a hollowing out of Nigeria's future, basically mortgaging its own development for decades to come. And if you need one single stark symbol for the collapse of basic public services, it's the power grid. Think about this. Nigeria, a nation rich in energy, has more people living without electricity than any other country on the planet. The national grid, the report states, is so fragile that it collapsed a dozen times in a single year, just plunging millions into darkness and crippling what little is left of the economy. So all of this brings us to the report's final section. After laying out all this evidence of systemic failure, it shifts from just analyzing the problem to making a direct and urgent plea for the international community to step in. And the report doesn't just sound the alarm, it offers 4 very specific actions. First, it calls on the UN to appoint a special investigator for human rights abuses. Second, it urges the International Criminal Court to open a formal investigation into crimes against humanity, like the Lekki massacre. Third, it asks Western nations to put targeted sanctions on corrupt officials. And finally, it suggests using the World Court to hold the Nigerian state itself accountable for failing to protect its own citizens. And so, the report leaves us all with this really powerful and really difficult unanswered question. After walking us through a decade of decline, it poses a challenge that goes way beyond Nigeria's borders. When a state fails its people, who is responsible for picking up the pieces? And who, if anyone, should step in?